It's a pleasure to be joined today by Larry Dunn, who is running for the Idaho House of Representatives in District 7, Seat B. So, without further ado, Larry, tell us about who you are and how you came on this journey to the point where you're running for public office.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity to interview with you via this format. I've never worked Zoom before, so this should be an interesting experience. Who I am? Well, as I'm prone to say, I'm a God-fearing, honorably discharged veteran of the United States Marine Corps and the United States Navy. I have worked for several years following my discharge as a licensed critical care nurse. And after that, I ran a histology laboratory for Humana Corporation. I then went back to college while continuing to work nights as a histologist. I went to college and earned a couple of degrees, one an associate degree in the administration of justice, and the second, I hold a bachelor's degree in public administration with a minor in collective bargaining. I've also got a few credits towards my graduate degree, but I can't seem to find the time to get that finished up. In any event, after graduating college, I decided to go into law enforcement, where I had a 22 plus year career, which I consider to be pretty productive. And I was honorably retired from that due to budget cuts at the time, and which came as a surprise, but actually it was a wonderful opportunity because it gave my wife and I an opportunity to look to see where would be a better place for us to live. Very often, as you know, people tend to get stuck, perhaps. I'm not sure that's the right word, but that's how we felt where we were because of the good jobs that we had. Well, once that was no longer a factor, we hunted around the Western United States, and some good friends of ours were living in Grangeville, Idaho. They said, "You got to come see this place," and we did, and fell in love with it, and we moved here. So that's the nutshell on who I am. The other part of why I'm running, I've been involved in politics for many, many years. I like to mention that probably the pinnacle up to this point of my involvement with the Republican Party specifically was I was a campaign manager for a chunk of Northern California, frankly, when Ted Cruz was running in the primary before Donald Trump beat him out and then ultimately became president. So I've been involved as a Republican for quite a number of years, and still I'm actively involved. I'm on my local Idaho County Republican Central Committee, as well as serving on a local school board. Why I'm running is I see many, many things happening in Idaho, which have happened to other states that have gone blue. And I can't just stand by and let that happen. I think I'm in a good position to do something about that. I have a fairly good background in a wide range of things, some of which were very complicated environments. I'm not afraid to work hard. My wife will tell you that I don't do anything without putting 110% into it. And so that is how I approach what I'm doing now. And by God's graces and the goodwill of the people of District 7, I hope to become the next representative for Seat B.
Speaking of District 7, I'm looking on the map over here. It is a really large district.
Yes,
You've
it is.
got Idaho County, which is that the largest county in the state?
It is. It is. I'm
And
told it's
then,
about the size of Massachusetts. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And then it goes all the way from Lewiston in the corner all the way down. It actually borders the north end of my district, District 14 at the north end of Gem County. It goes, it's just big.
Big.
So first of all, I have to ask, how do you campaign in a district that big? How do you get from place to place and reach out to the people? And then what are you hearing from the people in your district? What are their priorities? What are the things that concern them about state politics?
Sure. Good questions. Uh, Basically, it's Tina and I in our car. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be going to the City of Council, which is the county seat for Adams County, this afternoon, where we hope to be knocking on quite a number of doors and speaking to people there. And then, let's see, Thursday and Friday, we will be in Lewiston. And I'm going to be interviewed by the Nez Perce County Republican Central Committee on Thursday evening. And then we have a debate hosted by the Nez Perce County Republican Women's Club on Friday evening, which I'm looking forward to with some anxiety because nobody likes speaking in public, but nonetheless, it's a good opportunity. So the answer is we're driving all over everywhere. We were in Grangeville yesterday, which is 20 miles north of here in Idaho County, and we made contact with over 60 people. And I think had a very good outing. The reception that we're getting, by and large, has been very positive. I think many of the things that I care about deeply are things that Idahoans care about. I've heard of everything from, I'd say, probably taxes, um, specifically property taxes, are a big issue for a lot of people these days. That's a hugely complicated issue, especially in rural counties like we have here. Uh, you start making adjustments, and if they're too radical, uh, people can get hurt. We can actually do what I'll refer to as damage. And so I am absolutely in favor of looking at a way of reorganizing, if that's the proper term, how we finance government business in this state. As you know, counties are primarily funded by property tax,
Mhm.
and cities by sales tax. That's always been the balance. That's always been the primary means by which things get done. I just think we need to look at that as a whole, so that we can perhaps find a better, more equitable way. Things are a bit out of balance. That being said, school funding is a big issue here. I can't tell you how many people told me unsolicited, they're fed up with paying levies, much less with paying property tax to go to the public school system for a variety of reasons. Some people make the argument that they don't have kids, why should they pay for it? Or they paid when their kids were in, why should they have to continue to pay for it? Those types of things. And those are valid concerns. You also have low income people who it is a true burden on them to pay levies. So that being said, I'd say that's probably the biggest issue is property tax or just taxes in general. And then on top of that, almost always get a question about where do I stand on being pro-life and Second Amendment. And in both cases, with respect to pro-life, I am an abolitionist. I believe that children are a gift from God. And beyond that, they have absolutely every right to exist, to live the same as you or I, and that their circumstances of being conceived should have little to no bearing whatsoever on whether they're allowed to be born. That we even have to have this kind of conversation is a little bit sad to me, because I've never understood how we can be so arbitrary as some people are to say that abortion should just be a choice issue. I've been fighting that fight for a couple of decades, and Idaho has made excellent progress. But perhaps we can get into this a little bit more. I have some ideas if I get to Boise about how I'd like to address some ongoing concerns there. As far as the Second Amendment, I am frequently heard to say that if we don't have the Second Amendment, we don't have any of the other amendments, because we won't be able to push back, as it were. We won't be able to defend ourselves, our life, our liberty, and our right to live here as free citizens. So those are two of the big issues that tend to always come up, and I'm as solid as they come on both of them.
So going through those issues one at a time, you have property taxes. That's a hugely complex issue because you have so many taxing districts that use property taxes for their support. Everything from cities and counties, to school districts, fire districts, library districts, cemetery districts, even.
Mm-hmm.
And so they all need a piece of that. And legislature last year they passed House Bill 292, gave some property tax relief. This year, the governor's school facilities bill, it transferred some of that property tax that would go to school levies and to over to sales tax. However, during the debate, a lot of people worried that rural schools were not going to see much of that. So, I guess the school funding property tax issue is kind of combined. How do what are your ideas for property tax relief while at the same time maintaining funding for schools, especially rural schools, as I'm sure you have a lot of in your district?
Yeah, we're all rural around here. The biggest city in Idaho County is Grangeville. County seats just over 3,100 people. It's tiny by definition. However, District 7 is 56,000 people, so that does pose some differences in terms of rural versus city environments. With respect to my approach, I don't know enough about the subject, to be honest with you. My background is not in finance, and I'm not going to ever call myself a numbers guy, but I can understand things. I can understand concepts. I've written quite a bit on policy papers and grants and those types of things. So I'm not unfamiliar with the topic. But in terms of concepts, I think there needs to be some rethinking about property taxes and how we go about utilizing them, as well as imposing them. Property is, if I can use this language, I'll probably get in trouble for it. Property is a good thing to tax because it doesn't go away, and there's a certain amount of it. We're always going to have the same amount of land, and so government has found a nifty way to be able to tax it. It's largely based on ownership and the type of use that it's put to. So with respect to that, I would like to look at first, how do we make property tax more fair? If you're going to tax property owners, you have obvious distinctions between business properties and residential properties. You have people who are working and people who are no longer working by reason of either disability or retirement. I think those circumstances ought to be looked at differently. You shouldn't necessarily be taxing people across the board the same way. Now, I know that we have mechanisms within state law, like this circuit breaker law for low-income people that they can tap into. But the issue that I have, let's take up the issue of school levies, which are built into the funding mechanism for public schools here in Idaho. They're not an option for most schools. Most schools have to run a levy in order to maintain, much less grow. Well, when you have only the property, or excuse me, that's right. When you have only property owners who have to bear responsibility for that tax, yet you have people who don't own property able to vote to tax those people, I don't see how that comes close to being fair with respect to just orientation. I'd like to see a broader base of funding if we continue the levy system at all, which I'm not in favor of. In my personal experience working here, it hasn't worked out very well for us. The school funding system, the bureaucracy, the suffocating bureaucracy, as I've been heard to call it, needs reform. And the levy system is part of that. So it's all these things are interconnected when we talk about taxes. I'm in favor of looking at reducing and eventually getting completely away from grocery tax. In the meantime, I have an idea about how we can do that incrementally, so that as we go and the state finds itself in a position of having to deal each year with how do we replace or adjust for less tax revenue from groceries. I'd say perhaps we could stop taxing what I'll call staples. Those would be things like meat and vegetables and dairy products and bread and the things that actual food that people need to eat, and perhaps tax what I'll call processed foods. Everything from potato chips to frozen pizzas to donuts, those things which are above and beyond staples that people need to live on. But I find it to be immoral that we tax people's food. I don't think that's a proper role for government to have in terms of taking care of people, which is our primary responsibility as government, is to see to the general welfare of people, and that doesn't work for me. I don't know why we can't look at doing the same sorts of things with other forms of taxation. One of the things I hope to bring to the legislature is a willingness to look at things outside the box and ask a lot of why not questions. Well, why can't we do that? Why can't we explore what would it look like if we started taxing only processed food and not actual staple type food? What would that look like in terms of penciling it out. And then how do we go about finding a mechanism for replacing that income that would be lost if we did that, assuming we need to replace it in the first place? Because I think Idaho's um, government is, in my language, bloated. There's a number of things I think could be brought to bear to reduce the size of government and therefore to reduce the burden on the taxpayers. So all of these things are intertwined, and I don't mean to give you a rambling answer, but that's kind of how it works through my brain.
Well, I want to follow up on the idea for taxing processed foods and things. I remember when, probably 15 years ago, Michael Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, wanted to tax soda.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually got a pretty negative reaction from conservatives and Republicans because he's saying you're trying to nudge behavior in a certain way by taxing things that the government thinks that you shouldn't have. Now, I agree that processed food is not healthy and it's probably one of the major factors in our metabolic health crisis in this country. But do you think it's the role of government to pick and choose which direction you nudge people to go when it comes to food or anything else?
Well, my orientation towards recommending that is not does not have to do with behavior modification. What you mentioned about Mayor Bloomberg and sodas is still the same argument why states tend to tax cigarettes and to keep raising the tax on cigarettes because it'll allegedly cause people to quit smoking, and that's been proven to not be the case. People that want to participate or involve themselves with what we'll just generally refer to as vices, those things that we ought not to do, they're going to do them anyway. I don't think it's government's job to manipulate behavior by tax policy. That to me is it's inconsistent for starters with my Republican values and certainly with the platform. That's not a proper role of government. It happens, but I don't like it, and I can't imagine a circumstance where I would be in favor of, as you say, manipulating behavior by means of taxing. That's not right.
Going to the next issue, you mentioned abortion, pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, ever since the Supreme Court ruled 2 years ago in Dobbs that Roe v. Wade is overturned, the issue comes to the states, and we have pretty solid laws here in Idaho now that prohibit abortion. However, there's a couple exceptions. It's abortion pills are still fairly well unregulated. People can just order them from out of state, and you know. Honestly, even if we were to ban that, I'm not sure how you'd enforce it because it's going through the mail. What are we going to do? Search the mail? So it's a really tricky issue, and then obviously, it's a contentious one. I just saw a few days ago that some groups are preparing to put together an initiative to put abortion on the ballot, just like they're doing with ranked choice voting this year. They're looking for 2 years from now, which is the statewide election year, governor, attorney general, et cetera. They're going to try and put abortion on that ballot. So I guess what do you think about our current laws? What would you do to change them or strengthen them?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we prepare for a future where, we need to convince people that life is sacred? Because unfortunately, it looks like abortion is, fairly popular, at least to some extent, throughout the country.
You're correct in that. Unfortunately, it is. It's very much a cultural thing. It's become that way over the years. When the left started using the term choice in terms of what it is in fact, when it is in fact murder. I don't have any problem using that word. Um, with respect to the concept and the practice of the law that we currently have, the exceptions that you refer to, in my opinion, should not be there. And the reason I say that is I think in general, we're talking about the exception for rape and incest, and also for medical necessity when the life of the mother is in jeopardy. I think that's the two main ones. The two things about that is I'm not sure I oppose that much a medical decision to terminate a pregnancy when it is in fact the case medically that a woman's life is at risk. That's a medical decision, and I'm not going to second guess a doctor in an emergency room in those cases. I certainly don't want doctors to be in the position of having to balance a decision in the interest of their patients against what trouble they may get into with the law. That's that's not a good place for government to put doctors in. With respect to rape or incest, the only thing I can tell you is it makes no sense to me as a Christian, but also as someone who, or at least I like to think I can think things through logically. It makes no sense to me that we would murder an unborn child because of the actions of an adult external to their existence. In other words, because a woman is raped, however grievous and unfortunate that is, if that rape results in a pregnancy, that child has a right to life. And the child should not be punished because of the actions of the rapist. That makes no sense. And I can't go for that. So that is something that I would look to change in Idaho law if I have that opportunity. To take it one step further, Idaho's current abortion laws hang on one vote. And by that, I mean that the Supreme Court was in favor of Idaho's current abortion laws, was a 3-2 vote. That means the whole issue swings on one vote. And you and I know, as you suggested a minute ago, there are any number of people and organizations out there that are trying to overturn that. And on that fact alone, that's the whole issue swings on one vote. So one of the things, and it's on my website, if people want to take a look at that, one of the things I hope to get accomplished is to see to it that Idaho's abortion law becomes a part of Idaho's state constitution. That doesn't render it sacrosanct in the sense that it can't be challenged legally, but nonetheless, it makes more sense to me than having it hang on a single court decision, a single vote from the Supreme Court. So those would be the two main answers that I have for your question.
Yeah, everybody in Idaho, at least on the Republican side, says they're pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, want to lower taxes. So really, the devil's always in the details. Yeah. So you mentioned the Second Amendment. Are there any restrictions you would support? Red flag laws,
No,
additional taxes, background checks, all those things.
Sure. Well, one of the jobs I've had in the past has been a violent crime victim advocate, and I did that. I did that for a couple of years as a responsibility to the criminal courts where I came from, and so I've seen firsthand the results of violent crime. I've seen firsthand, more specifically, the results and the consequences that come from domestic violence, which is where these red flag laws come into consideration in terms of protection orders and those types of things. The issue that you have, first and foremost, with red flag laws is they are a complete ignoring of due process rights, as well as what I believe to be a Fourth Amendment issue with regard to even if you were to get a judge to sign an order to go seize someone's firearms under a red flag law, I don't believe, in my opinion, that would be constitutional. So for me, red flag laws, I can't, and I've thought about this quite a lot. Again, from my position as a crime victim advocate, but also from my position as a Republican. And I can't see how red flag laws can be, much less should be, implemented to any extent whatsoever, again, without very strict adherence to due process rights of the accused, because that's what we're talking about is protecting people who haven't even been convicted of a crime. In many, many cases, these red flag laws don't come into play after convictions. They come into play before, often before any charges are even filed. That's antithetical to me, to the whole concept of our rights.
It's interesting that you've seen, in your career, you've seen the aftermath of violent crime up close, and you come away with it, believing in a strong Second Amendment, the right of people to defend themselves.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, you have, our friends on the left. They would say, well, the guns are the problem, that we need to get rid of guns, and then we won't have that violent crime. But I think personally, I think they disregard human nature there. People will always find reasons and tools to hurt each other,
Sure.
to kill each other.
Absolutely.
And the gun, and I've said this before, the gun is an equalizer. It it makes it so, a small person can defend against a large person, a woman can defend against a man. And, it just boggles my mind that they want to take that away.
I don't understand it. I never have. I didn't grow up in a family that were big hunters and all that stuff, but we were definitely Second Amendment. Having been a rifleman in the Marine Corps, as well as my career in law enforcement, I've carried a gun for a few decades in the course of my employment, and I can't. And I've also, been involved in investigating crimes involving guns, and also at one point for a couple of years, I was a member of what was referred to as a fatal incident response team. And what that was about was anytime an officer within this jurisdiction where I was working was involved in any incident, to include a shooting where a person's life was either put at serious risk or somebody died, we would investigate those things. And so very often they were shooting cases, and so we got to look at quite a bit and analyze it, and come away with recommendations for the district attorney in terms of prosecution. So I have a bit of a unique, not exclusively unique, but I have a bit of a unique perspective on these things, given the several different jobs and responsibilities I've had over the years. So yeah, it's a big deal to me, and I could be more happy with Idaho's gun carry laws at this point. I think it's terrific. I think it's, who was it that said that an armed society is a polite society? We still
I,
wave at each other around here, even though most everybody's got a gun on their hip, and I'm okay with that.
yeah. So, those are a few of the issues. Maybe we'll come to some more soon. But I wanted to ask, what specifically motivated you to run now? What are some of the votes that your opponents made in the last two sessions or the last 2 years that you disagree with, that you would have chosen differently?
Well, one of the issues for me, it's a two-pronged answer. Let's do the first one because it's more simple. The first one is, I think that if you're going to be elected to be the representative, and I put that term in quotes, then you ought to act like it. You want to call people back. You want to answer emails. You want to be available. You want to be someone who is present in the community, learning, finding out what's important to the people that you represent. And I don't see that happening right now with our current representation. And that's been the case for too many years, just let me put it that way. So that was a big motivator for me. The second thing is that with respect to the votes of my opponent, in particular, and I asked him this at a town hall last year. My understanding was, and we're talking about last legislative session, 2023, nonetheless, this one really stands out in my mind. There was a net 300% increase to the State Board of Education. And my opponent admitted that he voted for that. And that just boggles my mind. I can't imagine, other than perhaps in a time of war, which is not applicable in this situation, why you would vote to have any government agency get a net increase in their budget of 300% across the different programs and things like that. Not only does that defy common sense, that's as anti-Republican as it gets if Republicans are about limited government and when possible shrinking government. So that's the best example I have of what I'll call a series of votes. There's all that I object to. There's also what I call the indices, the different organizations that track voting records. We all know about the infamous Idaho Freedom Foundation, and then there's the Stop Idaho Rhinos, and there are others out there who look at from various perspectives, not all of them strictly Republican platform, but they look at individual legislators' voting records. And unfortunately, our current representation's voting record does not reflect that we have a solid platform following representative, Republican platform, I mean, representative in that seat. And that needs to change because the problems the state is facing, I think, need that basis, need those principles in order to move forward and make good decisions, because we've got some pretty heavy stuff that's coming across our desks, and it's our responsibility as citizens to do what we can in our own way to make things better when they are not going right, as well as to find ways to be innovative and to help each other to live the lives that all of us want to live. It's called community, and that's what I'm all about. I tell people nothing I do should ever surprise you. I say that I've signed the Republican Platform Pledge for a reason, because I want people to hold me accountable to that standard. And I'm as dead serious as I can be. The reason I'm running is because I believe that, and my wife Tina and I talked about this extensively last year, that I think that, and I'm not one to throw this language around lightly, but I think this is where God wants me to be at this time, in service to my fellow man, my country, my state, my community. All of us need to do our part, and this is just how I believe I can best do that. If things don't work out in my favor, I'm not going away. I'll still be out there fighting the good fight, but for right now, this is the fight in front of me.
You mentioned some, important decisions that are coming up. Uh, I spent a lot of time at the Capitol this year, and over the last 2 years, I've really watched the legislative session closely. Uh, you know, when you're in there, you have hundreds of bills, hundreds of budgets for one, but then hundreds of other bills on various subjects. And you're focused on your committees. You have two, maybe three committees that you have to work on, and so it's a lot of work in a very short time. So, people naturally turn to subject matter experts, and a lot of those subject matter experts are lobbyists. They come
Sure.
in with their green name tags. They come in, sit you down for a few moments, and say, "Here's why you need to vote." One way on this issue, and,
Right.
and so you're hit with a lot of that all day long. You know, uh, Assuming you win and you're there next January, how do you find information on how to vote? How do you stay grounded and connected to the citizens of your district who you're representing? And how do you make those decisions?
Good. That's the first time anybody's asked me that. That's a great question. I'm really glad you did. The way I look at it is, well, let me put it this way. Back in the last year's session, 2023, I was fortunate enough to sit in for Senator Cindy Carlson for a time, so I got a firsthand look at how things work day in and day out, and I am pleased to tell you that I understand the environment. I absolutely do. It's actually how it's supposed to work. I had a judge that I worked for quite a number of years who used to refer to it as making sausage. Okay, this is just how the process is supposed to work in a republic where we have representative government. So, with respect to the lobbyists and the special interests and the different forces in many cases that may come to bear on decisions that you make, I think the first thing you do is you do your homework before you get there and find out who those legislators are, especially the senior ones who most align with your values and your principles, and you seek those people out. That's, I think, the first thing that you do, which brings me to want to talk about the Idaho Freedom Caucus. I'm a huge fan. That'll be one of my first objectives, is to become a member of that caucus, because I think those representatives are absolutely on the right track. So you don't go down there thinking you're going to be the Lone Ranger, because you'll end up standing by yourself most of the time. But you learn how to work together. If you have a question, representatives themselves get to be subject matter experts. Some people are really dialed into finance. Some people are dialed into healthcare. Some people are dialed into law enforcement, which is obviously a love of mine. You go to those people that you trust and you seek their counsel. Scripture is pretty clear about that. That's actually something that God tells us to do, is seek out those people you know to be wise and whose judgments you can trust. So you make decisions based on what good wisdom that you can find out there, both collectively and through individuals. On top of that, I think the lobbyists are there for a reason. Some of them are there strictly for the money, strictly for the paycheck. That may or may not be the majority. I don't know. I'm willing to listen to anybody. But as I had a conversation with a young lady in a garage yesterday, as we were knocking on doors in Grangeville, we had to agree to disagree. Because of her position on a particularly contentious issue, because there are going to be some things that I just, as they say, can't go there. One of those would be weakening our abortion laws. Uh, this issue of porn in our school libraries and in the public libraries, for that matter, that we even have to be having these conversations, just boggles my mind in terms of what that says about our culture. And our culture, I think, is going to be largely reflected in those lobbyists, because they're going to be, they make their living by trying to convince people to see things their way. I look forward to the challenge, frankly, uh, because I don't know how I can be a representative if I don't at least listen. But lastly, to cap off this whole little part, I would say that should I get elected, the people in this district can expect to hear from me on a regular basis. And if it's something that I think is, or they tell me is critical to them, then I'm going to be out in our communities by electronically or whatever means I have to find out what does my constituency think about this issue. So all these things can and should come into play. So I hope that kind of sort of answers your question.
No, that's sounds reasonable. Speaking of, legislators being subject matter experts, and obviously you have experience in quite a few different areas. If you're fortunate enough to be elected, which committees would you like to serve on? Where do you think your experiences and talents would be best served?
With all due respect, I like the question and I will answer it, but I hesitate to answer because I think many people will look at me and think that I'm very conservative, and I hope so because I am. And so if I publicize what committee I'd like to be on, I'm not sure that I won't end up someplace else, because leadership and leadership isn't exactly what I'll call staunchly conservative. So I would like to be on education. I would like to be on the judicial committee. I have some big problems with funding and with the philosophy in both of those areas. I've already spoken about the our education system here in Idaho. I'd be happy to talk about that more if you want to. But I also have a big issue with the direction the state is going with respect to prison reform. I do have quite a bit of experience in that area as well, and I've got quite a bit to say about it in terms of asking people to just hold on and let's not be too quick to think about prisons in a linear fashion. That's a conversation I'd like to have very much, not only here locally but in Boise.
What do you mean by that? Linear fashion?
Well, there appears to be a pretty substantial push right now to, and I will accept obvious violent crime outside of this. I'm talking about drug cases, property crimes, those things which are not violent crimes, which may send people to prison. There's a huge push, which I think has been poorly put together, poorly constructed at this point, to offer rehabilitation as the assumed option for most people coming into the system who commit crimes. And that of course is an indication of how pervasive substance abuse is in our culture, and that's a real factor. But I think, just to, and again, back to my website, I make a few statements about this. I think this idea that you offer somebody repeated chances of drug rehabilitation instead of the consequence of prison for repeat criminal behavior is wrongheaded. I can give you, and I know it's not necessarily the topic of this conversation, but I can give you multiple firsthand experiences of being involved with people. Some people, I have a gentleman in mind who had literally been to prison 7 different times for manufacturing methamphetamine. And he and I came to an understanding about a decision that he ultimately was going to need to make. And that was, do you want to keep going back to prison, or do you want to straighten your act up? And that was the bottom line. And it was through as much pressure as I could bring to bear on this individual that he finally decided that I could do something better with my life. And right now he's a supervising counselor at a very successful drug rehabilitation program because of the orientation that I took towards this concept of rehabilitation. And so it's a big deal with me. I can go on and on for many hours, frankly, because I've written on it and I have worked in it. But nonetheless, this is corrections, as it's typically called, is a big money issue for this state. And I think we may be headed in the wrong direction. So I want to get in on that conversation.
Yeah. It seems like so many, parts of our society are just starting to break down, and crime and drug abuse, they're symptoms of a larger social decay, I'd say. You got to take care of those. You got to protect people. But at the same time, we have to figure out why our society is doing that. And I don't know. Somehow
Well,
I'm trying to.
I can give you my 2 cents on it if you
Sure.
want. I think the fact that we've moved away from God, I think the fact that churches, by and large, have become passive. Most pastors, and I say this from firsthand experience, and it pains me to have to say so. I think most pastors are deliberately uninvolved with their communities with respect to their problem solving that needs to be done there. It used to be, and again, my family had experiences this in with respect to my parents and the like. Had it not been for family and for a strong church influence on our family, uh, me as an infant would have probably ended up in the foster care system, and I can say that straight up and look anybody in the eye and say, I've seen what happens when churches abdicate their responsibility to care for the indigent, to care for the widows and orphans. I make mention in my campaign that my wife Tina and I have both started. Excuse me, my wife Tina and I have started 2 different Safe Families for Children's ministries, which are strictly voluntary, no government involved, church-based ministries that come alongside parents in crisis to help them to get what they need to make it so that their children are safe, and to hopefully legally, but hopefully avoid involvement in the foster care system, much less the court system at all, because I see that as a role of the church, and that's non-existent pretty much anymore in this culture. That's a big, big reason. The other thing is, I think we have turned over responsibility for handling most of our problems to government. Let's just start right there. That's a problem. Government does not exist to solve our personal problems. It just doesn't. But that's how we treat it, and that's how we expect it to treat us. And that's just wrongheaded, and it's not good for us. It's just not good. And that's the reason I think we're in the trouble we're in.
I think you're right about government has taken over all these areas that used to be, churches and charitable organizations, families, communities. But the question is, how do you unwind that? When Representative Redmond came up with a bill to put some, thresholds and standards in for Medicaid expansion, hundreds of people signed up to testify and said, "Don't touch this. I need this. I will die without it." People have become dependent on government, and any talk about pulling that back even a little bit, and it provokes a very passionate reaction. And the way a republican system of government works, if the people come out against you, you're not going to be in office anymore. So how do you roll that back in such a way that you don't just leave people hanging out to dry, and you don't just torpedo your own career and the program continues anyway?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a spot on question. The word I'm going to use right up front is incrementalism. The fact of the matter is, you're exactly right. And I'm not going to immediately assume anything about a person and their individual need for government assistance. That is a factor of the government agency itself, and whether first, are they properly applying the rules with respect to eligibility for that program. And I am understanding that there's a lot of looseness in how the application of the rules are being applied, which could be a big piece of the problem. But to get more specific about how do you start rolling that back, you do so incrementally. I mentioned, I think I did, or if I didn't, I'll say it now. I lost my job after 2 decades in law enforcement because of budget cutbacks. And one of the reasons that I know that they wanted to do that is because they wanted to restructure. And I don't, it's their right to make changes as they see necessary in the legislature, but they wanted to roll back what they consider to be excessive salaries and benefit packages for senior staff as well as line staff. And so this is a way to do it: is you start laying off, or you start getting rid of the people that are at the high end of the system, and you bring in other people to do those jobs at a lower pay scale. And so I think that kind of an approach, it's called attrition, is how you deal with rolling back. For example, the big problem we have with Medicaid expansion is you start dealing with people as they come in over the years to start moving things back, because otherwise you could cause some legitimate problems for people. I don't see where there's any other answer than to do it incrementally, to properly apply the rules and to make sure that what you're doing makes sense for what you have in front of you, but then plan for how you start dialing things back into the future. It's the planning that we're missing in large part. It's the long-term thinking. This culture we're in, the government that we have tends to think one fiscal year to the next.
Yeah.
And we don't, planning is almost never part of the equation unless it's, frankly, the left tends to kick our backsides a lot of times because they do a little more longer term planning and work towards accomplishing goals incrementally. We don't do that. When I say we, I'm talking conservatives, and we need to start thinking further than just the end of the fiscal year. And so to me, it's a very complex issue, but I think it's absolutely doable. As I'm fond of saying, it took us a while to get here. It's going to take us a while to get out. It just will.
So, Larry Dunn, I appreciate your time. And is there anything we haven't covered here that you'd like to say, or just some closing thoughts for the people?
Well, all I can tell you is that what you see is what you get. You can talk to anybody that I've worked with, and I don't think you're going to hear anything too terrible. I do have a broad base of experience. I will ask people to go to my website, and I would love any questions that you have. I'll talk about anything with anybody. My wife says I'm one of those people that can talk to a tree. Now, that isn't to say I want trees on my website, but the fact of the matter is, who I am is what you see on that website. If you don't know me and can't talk to me personally, send me a message. I'll be happy to talk to you. The website is Dunn, the number 4, Idaho.com. And by the grace of God, with the help of the good conservatives that we have in District 7, I hope to see you in Boise in January, Brian.
Larry Dunn, running for House of Representatives, District 7, Seat B. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.